Close your eyes for just a moment. Can you smell the sweet metallic scent of purple mimeograph paper fresh from your teacher's desk? Or perhaps you can hear the heavy metallic clunk of a rotary phone dial spinning slowly back into place. These are not just distant memories. They are the sights, sounds, and smells of a childhood in 1960s America. Today, we are taking a deeply nostalgic journey back to an era that shaped who we are. We will explore 20 tiny forgotten details of a 1960s childhood that only our generation truly understands and remembers. And wait until we reach the very end of our journey, where we will recall the blinding flash and the distinct smell of burning ozone that captured our most precious family moments. Before we dive into our memories, let us pause and think about how differently time flowed back then. The world moved at a much slower, more deliberate pace. There was no internet, no smartphones, and no instant gratification demanding our constant attention. Today, society often assumes that without modern technology, our lives must have been empty or emotionally poor. But you and I know the exact opposite is true, because we had to wait for things. Whether it was the television broadcast to begin or a letter to arrive in the mail, we learned the profound value of patience. Because we were not staring at glowing screens, we looked at each other. We lived outdoors. We knew all our neighbors, and our emotional lives were infinitely richer and more sincere. We had genuine human connection, wrapped in a blanket of neighborhood safety and the profound beauty of simple, everyday pleasures. Close your eyes and let us travel back to a sweltering July afternoon in the 1960s. Do you remember the absolute pure joy of drinking water straight from a rubber garden hose after running around the neighborhood playing tag or hide and seek? You were practically parched. You would grab that thick green hose lying in the sun. The first few gulps were always shockingly hot, tasting strongly of warm rubber and dirt. But you let it run for a few seconds onto the sun-baked grass until the water turned wonderfully icy cold. There was no bottled water, no sports drinks, just that magical metallic stream directly from the outdoor spigot. You would cup your small hands or just stick your mouth right into the stream, water splashing all over your face and soaking your t-shirt. We never worried about germs or filtered water back then. It was the taste of pure summer freedom, shared with every kid on the block who lined up for their turn at the hose. It was a communal ritual of cooling down before rushing back into the endless outdoor adventures that defined our youth. And now, let us remember the warm summer evenings when the mosquito fogger truck slowly rolled through the neighborhood. Today, people would be horrified, but back in the 1960s, the arrival of that truck was like a neighborhood parade. As soon as we heard the deep rumble of the engine and saw the thick, billowing white clouds rolling down the street, every kid would drop their bicycles and run out. We would actually chase the truck, disappearing into the dense, sweet-smelling fog. It felt like we were playing hide and seek in the clouds, completely invisible to one another. The chemical mist felt cool against the evening air, and the smell was distinct. Something a bit like diesel fuel mixed with a strange sweetness that coated the back of your throat. Parents would sit on their front porches sipping iced tea and chatting, perfectly unbothered by the thick fog enveloping their children. To us, it was pure magic, a mysterious weather event created just for our amusement, right before the streetlights flickered on to call us home for dinner. Let us drift back to the grocery store checkout lines and the incredibly satisfying ritual of S and H green stamps. Do you recall watching the cashier tear off long perforated strips of those little green squares and hand them to your mother? Collecting them was a true family project. You would sit at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with a damp sponge in a little saucer, though most of the time we just licked them until our tongues felt dry and tasted like cheap glue. We would meticulously paste them into those little paper-saver books. As the books filled up, the anticipation grew. We would spend hours flipping through the thick, glossy catalog, dreaming about what we could redeem them for. Maybe it was a new toaster, a set of fine towels, or if we saved enough books, a shiny new bicycle. It taught us the profound value of patience and delayed gratification. Getting a reward meant working together, saving week after week, and finally taking that glorious trip to the Redemption Center to trade our little glued books for a real tangible treasure. Now let us walk into the kitchen and open the heavy rounded door of a 1960s refrigerator. Waiting inside the freezer compartment was a seemingly simple object that required pure physical strength, the aluminum ice cube tray. There was no automatic ice maker gently dropping cubes into a bin. Instead, you had to retrieve this freezing metal tray and grip the lever located right in the center. Pulling that lever required genuine force. You would pull back, and the metal separators would crunch and crack against the solid ice. Often, the freezing metal would stick painfully to your warm, damp fingers. The sound of the ice violently cracking and fracturing was incredibly satisfying. If you pulled too hard, tiny shards of ice would fly across the linoleum kitchen floor. We would gather those jagged, oddly shaped ice blocks and drop them into a tall glass of lemonade or sweet tea. We never minded the physical effort, because that frozen reward was absolutely essential for surviving the brutal, unair-conditioned summer days. The sound of real solid ice clinking against thick glass on a hot afternoon is a sweet melody that modern uniformly shaped ice cubes simply can never replicate. Let us return to the wooden desks of our elementary school classrooms to recall a sensory experience that no modern student will ever understand. Do you remember the moment the teacher handed out a fresh stack of test papers or worksheets? The very first thing every single child did, in perfect unison, was lift the paper to their nose and inhale deeply. The smell of that purple mimeograph ink was absolutely intoxicating. It was a sharp, sweet, chemical aroma of solvent and spirit-duplicating fluid that instantly woke up your senses. The paper was always slightly cool and damp to the touch, fresh from the cranking drum of the machine down in the principal's office. You could almost feel the rhythmic clack and swoosh of the machine in the wetness of the purple letters. We did not have pristine laser printers or digital tablets. We had beautifully smudged, violet-colored math problems that smelled like magic. That distinct aroma remains forever etched in our memories, a fragrant bookmark, marking the innocent days of our early education. Think back to the heavy wooden cabinet television sets that dominated our living rooms. Television in the 1960s was not a 24-hour endless stream of content. Do you remember waking up early on a Saturday morning, practically shivering in your pajamas, eager for the cartoons to begin? But the stations had not started broadcasting yet. Instead, You would turn the heavy plastic dial with a loud, satisfying clunk, wait for the vacuum tubes to slowly warm up, and stare at the Indian head test pattern or a series of grayscale circles. The screen hummed with a low electric buzz, accompanied by a continuous, high-pitched tone. We would sit cross-legged on the carpet, simply watching that static image, practicing the ultimate form of patience. Then the magic moment arrived. The national anthem would play, a voice would welcome you to the broadcast day, and the screen would burst into the animated life of Looney Tunes or the Flintstones. The wait made the reward so much sweeter, making every single minute of programming feel like a special fleeting privilege. Let us take a trip to the local neighborhood park, a place that would give modern safety inspectors absolute nightmares. Do you remember the sheer thrill and danger of 1960s playground equipment? The massive metal slides stood towering above the asphalt or hard-packed dirt. In the middle of July, sitting on that unshaded, polished steel slide was like sitting on a frying pan. You would brave the intense heat, burning the backs of your bare legs just for the rush of flying down at top speed. Then there was the merry-go-round, a heavy iron disc that we would spin as fast as humanly possible. Older kids would push it until their faces turned red, while the younger ones clung on for dear life, feeling the incredible pull of centrifugal force. We had giant seesaws that would violently crash to the ground if your partner suddenly jumped off, and towering monkey bars that tested our grip and our courage. We returned home with scraped knees, bruised shins, and dirty hands, wearing our minor injuries as proud badges of honor from a day of glorious, unstructured freedom. And now, let us remember the gentle, comforting sounds of the early morning. Before the sun even fully crested the horizon, the quiet neighborhood streets would be visited by the milkman. Do you remember the distinct, rhythmic clinking of heavy glass bottles rattling in the metal carrier as he walked up the driveway? You would open the front door to find those beautiful, thick glass bottles sitting perfectly inside the insulated aluminum porch box. The milk back then was entirely different. The rich, thick cream always floated right to the top. Before pouring it over your cereal, you had to firmly shake the bottle to mix it, or if you were lucky, your mother would let you skim the cream off the top for a special treat. In the winter, if the milkman came before you woke up, the freezing temperatures would push the frozen cream right up through the paper cap, making it stand up like a little snowy hat. It was a deeply personal service, a quiet connection between the local dairy and our family table that we completely took for granted. Think back to the imaginary battles we fought in the backyard, armed with our favorite die-cast metal cap guns. Playing cowboys and Indians or cops and robbers was a daily neighborhood ritual. Do you recall the smell? It is perhaps one of the most defining scents of a 1960s childhood. The sharp, burnt match smell of sulfur from the little red paper roll of caps. You would carefully load the roll into the handle of your revolver, threading it up to the hammer. Every time you pulled the trigger, the hammer smashed down on the tiny dot of gunpowder with a loud, satisfying crack, sending a tiny wisp of white smoke into the air. Your thumbs would actually get callous from pulling back the stiff metal hammer over and over again. Sometimes the paper would jam, and you would have to pull it out, or we would simply place an entire roll of caps on the concrete sidewalk and smash it with a heavy rock just to hear the deafening bang and watch the smoke billow up. It was pure, noisy, harmless fun that connected us to the characters we watched on television. Let us revisit the local corner store and the heavy, substantial feel of a glass soda bottle. Drinking a soda in the 1960s was an absolute treat, not a daily habit. The bottles were thick, contoured glass, beautifully embossed with the logos of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, or RC Cola. The thick glass would sweat profusely in the summer heat, leaving wet rings on the wooden porch table. You needed a metal bottle opener to pop off the crimped metal cap, which we would often collect or nail to the underside of a treehouse. But the true ritual was the return. Every bottle had a 2-cent deposit on it. We would scour the neighborhood, searching the ditches and roadsides for abandoned bottles. Finding 5 bottles meant you had a shiny dime, which was enough to buy a brand new ice-cold soda or handful of penny candy at the local pharmacy. Dragging a little red wagon full of clinking glass bottles to the grocer to cash in our hard-earned bounty was our very first lesson in economics. It made us appreciate the true value of small change and the incredibly sweet reward of an ice-cold drink on a scorching summer afternoon. Now let us walk through the doors of the local shoe store. Buying new shoes for the upcoming school year was a serious, ceremonial event. Do you remember sitting in those slightly elevated chairs while the shoe salesman, usually an older gentleman in a neat shirt and tie, kneeled before you? He would pull out the heavy, cold metal Brannock device to measure your feet. You had to take off your shoes and place your stockinged foot onto the cold metal plate. He would slide the little metal bars firmly against your heel, the side of your foot, and your toes to find your exact width and length. In the early 60s, some stores even still had the glowing wooden fluoroscope machines, where you could literally look down through the viewfinder and see the green glowing bones of your toes wiggling inside the shoe. It felt like pure science fiction. When you finally put on those stiff, perfectly fitted leather shoes, you would run down the carpeted aisle of the store to prove to your mother just how incredibly fast they made you. Let us step back into the kitchen on a Friday night, the evening for family television. Long before the invention of the microwave oven, making popcorn was a thrilling interactive event, thanks to Jiffy Pop. Do you remember the heavy aluminum pan with the flat spiral curled foil on top? You would turn on the gas or electric stove burner and place the pan directly on the heat. The trick was you had to continuously shake it back and forth over the burner. Slowly, you would hear the oil sizzling and then the first sharp pop. As the popping rapidly increased, the flat foil would magically begin to swell and expand, puffing up into a giant shiny silver balloon. We kids would stand on our tiptoes, eyes wide, watching it grow larger and larger, always slightly terrified and thrilled that it might actually explode. When the popping finally slowed, your mother would carefully slice open the hot foil with a knife, releasing a cloud of glorious, salty, buttery steam. It was not just a snack. It was a spectacular culinary performance right in our own home. Think back to the beginning of the school year and the unparalleled joy of a brand new box of 64 Crayola crayons. It was the ultimate status symbol of the 1960s elementary school classroom. If you had the big box, you were absolute royalty. Opening that iconic yellow and green box for the very first time was a sensory delight. The smell of fresh wax was overwhelming and deeply comforting. Inside, the crayons were perfectly arranged in ascending stepped rows, their paper wrappers completely pristine, their tips perfectly pointed. You had exotic colors you never knew existed, like burnt sienna, periwinkle, and magenta. But the absolute best part of the 64 count box was the built-in plastic sharpener on the back. When your favorite color eventually wore down to a flat nub, you would carefully peel back a bit of the paper wrapper, insert the crayon into the sharpener, and slowly twist. Watching the little wax shavings curl out was endlessly satisfying, keeping your colorful arsenal ready for the next blank page of your coloring book. And now let us remember the central hub of family communication, the heavy, indestructible rotary dial telephone hanging on the kitchen wall. Making a phone call was a physical task. You had to place your finger in the plastic hole for each number, pull the dial all the way clockwise to the metal finger stop, and let it go. You would listen to the mechanical whirring sound as it spun back to its starting position. If your finger slipped on a 9 or a 0, you had to hang up and start the entire process all over again. But the true magic lay in the telephone cord. That coiled, incredibly long spring cord was a lifeline for privacy. As a teenager, you would stretch that cord to its absolute physical limits, pulling it taut across the kitchen, around the corner, and into the hallway or pantry, desperately trying to get out of earshot of your parents. Over the years, the cord would become hopelessly twisted and tangled into permanent knots. That telephone was an anchor, keeping us tethered to our home while connecting us to our friends. Let us drift back to those rare, highly anticipated evenings when Mother took the night off from cooking, and we were treated to the incredible novelty of a Swanson TV dinner. In the 1960s, eating a meal out of a segmented aluminum tray while watching television was the height of modern living. Do you recall peeling back the stiff foil to reveal the steaming compartments? There was always perfectly geometrical sliced turkey with incredibly salty gravy, a scoop of mashed potatoes that never quite tasted like real potatoes, and a small portion of mixed peas and carrots. But the absolute crown jewel of the tray was the dessert compartment in the center. It usually held a cherry or apple cobbler that would somehow reach the temperature of molten lava in the oven. Even though it inevitably burned the roof of your mouth, it tasted like pure heaven. Eating in the living room, balancing that hot metal tray on a flimsy folding tray table while watching the Ed Sullivan Show, felt like a glamorous glimpse into the future. Think back to family road trips in the massive, wood-paneled station wagons that ruled the American highways. There were no seat belts, no airbags, and certainly no portable electronic devices. The absolute best place to be, the most coveted territory for any child, was the way back. It was that large, cavernous space behind the rear seats, often with a rear-facing window. We would spread out blankets and pillows, completely unrestrained, turning the back of the moving car into our own personal playroom. We played endless games of punch buggy, waved at the truckers driving behind us, trying to get them to honk their loud air horns, and watched the white lines of the highway quickly disappear under the rear bumper. When we got tired, we simply laid down and fell asleep to the gentle, rhythmic hum of the massive V8 engine and the swaying of the heavy steel chassis. It was an era of profound innocence and unhindered freedom, where the journey itself was just as much of an adventure as the actual destination. Let us return to our bedrooms and the hypnotic, scratching sounds of a portable record player. Listening to music in the 1960s was a deeply deliberate and physical act. You did not just press a button on a screen. You carefully pulled the vinyl record out of its paper sleeve, gripping it strictly by the edges so your fingers would not smudge the delicate grooves. For our favorite hit singles, the small 45 RPM records, we had to snap in those little yellow plastic spider adapters in the center. Do you remember stacking 5 or 6 records on the tall spindle? You would watch in fascination as the metal arm clicked, the first record dropped down with a soft slap, and the tone arm automatically swung over and lowered the needle. The warm, slightly crackly analog sound that filled the room possessed a certain soul and depth that digital music lacks. We would sit on the floor for hours, reading the liner notes and memorizing every single word, entirely lost in the music. Now let us recall a slightly more painful yet universal memory of a 1960s childhood. When you inevitably tripped on the concrete sidewalk or took a tumble from your bicycle, you ran home crying with a badly scraped knee. Your mother would take you into the bathroom, wash the dirt out, and pull a small glass bottle from the medicine cabinet. It was the dreaded mercurochrome. It came with a little glass wand attached to the cap, which she used to paint your wound a vibrant neon reddish orange. The stinging sensation was absolutely furious, making you dance around the bathroom on one foot while blowing frantically on the scrape to cool the fire. For days afterward, you walked around with bright orange knees, a highly visible badge of your rugged outdoor adventures. We did not have fancy, painless antibacterial ointments. That stinging, vividly colored liquid was the harsh but effective cure-all for every childhood abrasion, a vivid sensory memory that still makes us wince and smile today. Think back to the hottest days of summer and the magical sound that could stop time itself. You would be playing in the yard when suddenly, faintly in the distance, you heard the high, cheerful ringing of the Good Humor ice cream truck bells. Absolute panic and exhilaration would set in. You would sprint into the house, desperately begging your mother for some loose change. Clenching a silver quarter tightly in your sweaty palm, you ran back to the street, praying the truck had not passed your house. The truck would slowly approach, a gleaming white oasis driven by a man in a crisp white uniform and a shiny coin changer on his belt. Standing on your tiptoes, peering at the colorful pictures on the side of the truck, the choices felt monumental. Would you choose a toasted almond bar, a strawberry shortcake, or perhaps the classic chocolate-coated Good Humor bar? Unwrapping that frozen treat and taking the first cold bite as it rapidly melted down your fingers was the absolute pinnacle of summer joy. Finally, let us remember how we captured these fleeting moments of our youth. In the 1960s, taking a photograph was not cheap or infinite. If your family had a Kodak Instamatic camera, taking a picture indoors required a flashcube. Do you remember those little clear plastic cubes filled with delicate wire mesh? You would press the cube onto the top of the camera. When you pressed the shutter, there was a loud pop, a blinding burst of white light that left spots in your vision and a distinct smell of burning ozone. The cube would then spin mechanically, presenting a fresh bulb for the next shot. You only had 4 flashes per cube, making every single photograph precious. Or perhaps you were lucky enough to have a Polaroid camera. We would watch in absolute awe as the heavy camera spit out a damp, gray square of paper. The entire family would crowd around, waiting minutes that felt like hours, watching the ghostly images slowly fade into vibrant, colorful existence right before our eyes. As our journey through the 1960s comes to a close, we realize a profound truth. We do not just miss the heavy glass milk bottles, the metal playgrounds, or the smell of cap guns. What we truly ache for is the feeling of that era. We miss our youth, the undeniable sense of community, and a time when the world felt simpler, slower, and infinitely more connected. Those 20 tiny details are the anchors to our past, reminding us of the beautiful foundation that built our generation. If this nostalgic journey brought a smile to your face, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video to help keep these precious memories alive. Now, I would love to hear from you. Which of these memories brought back the strongest emotions? Or what forgotten detail from your own 1960s childhood would you add to this list? Please share your personal stories in the comments below, because your memories are what make this community so incredibly special.